Okay, dear viewers, thank you for joining us. You're watching our weekly program, Talk to OBN on OBN Horn of Africa. In this edition, we'll be talking about one of the current affairs, the port outlet deal that was made between Ethiopia and Somaliland. For his expertise, I am joining by Professor Lawrence Freeman, a very senior analyst in Horn of Africa and beyond. Professor, thank you for your time.
Thanks a lot for being with me today.
Okay, let me ask you this. Is this memorandum of understanding made between Ethiopia and Somaliland would bring a paradigm shift in the entire Horn of Africa in terms of economy and other stuffs?
Well, it has the potential to do that because what actually we're already seeing is the movement towards regional economic integration, which is one of the goals of the African Union and of the African Free Trade Agreement. If people in the region, the citizens and leaders of the nations of the Horn of Africa and East Africa, understood better the concept of physical economy, they would realize that this is a benefit to all the people and all the nations in this region. With Ethiopia being, I would say, quote, the major economic powerhouse, increasing its trade through another area on the Gulf of Eden or Red Sea, a port development capability. This will increase trade. This will increase the throughput of products. This will increase infrastructure. All of this will help lift up the economies of all the nations in the region and would begin the process of extending regional integration. Don't forget, you have the beginning of integration already with the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam exporting electricity to Djibouti, Sudan, and Kenya. So it's already taking place. And this would move it even further. So rather than some silly people who don't understand economics talking about war and confrontation, this policy with Ethiopia's port development is actually the opposite. It can bring economic development, which brings peace and stability.
Lately, you've commented, on the huge expense that Ethiopia pays for port rent to execute import and export trade. And to what extent would this memorandum of understanding and the realization of this sea outlet reduce the burden that is, hindering Ethiopia one way or another to not, further going for other options?
The cost, as I understand it now, of using the port of Djibouti is $1.5 billion and possibly more. Now, that money is paid by foreign exchange. That means dollars or other, quote, internationally accepted currencies. This is a huge drain on a developing economy such as Ethiopia. My understanding is that if we have a port development project elsewhere on the coast, that will be paid in the local Ethiopian currency. That would be a huge savings for the Ethiopian government. Now, the Ethiopian government, by trying to solidify with Somaliland a long-term lease, let's say 50 years is one figure we've seen, this gives Ethiopia the long-term capability of investing more in A, the development of the port, and B, developing a new transportation corridor, either high-speed rail or otherwise, to the port. But no country is going to make those investments, which are very large, unless they have a long-term agreement. And this is what Ethiopia was trying to work out earlier with Eritrea. So this would be a win-win, that Ethiopia would save its foreign exchange or reduce the cost, and at the same time be making new investments. And this would have a spillover effect to the other economies in the region. So it's very unfortunate that people start immediately talking about threats. Don't take 1 inch of our territory. This will not happen. This is an act of aggression. This is foolish talk. There's no act of aggression. There's not going to be a war. There's not going to be a military confrontation. The question is, are we wise enough to understand the economic benefits to the entire region? And economic development is the way to reach peace and security. And therefore, I think this, however the final deal is worked out, I think it can help all the nations in the Horn of Africa.
Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed, in his remark before the MoU, he said it will be ushered on win-win approach. Perhaps the Ethiopian Airlines and the Grand Renaissance Dam would take a lion's share in having a share with that of the Somaliland in order to have a friendly cooperation in dealing with this outlet. How do you see this win-win approach?
Yes, well, this is what Dr. Abiy Ahmed was talking about last year in the fall, was a transactional relationship for potentially a port in Eritrea. And this is now what they're discussing in the MoU with Somaliland. Transactional. That means that the Somaliland would get certain income stream from, as you mentioned, either the Ethiopian Airlines or the Grand Ethiopian Dam or Ethocom. They would get an income stream, and Ethiopia gets a long-term lease. The figure I've seen is 50 years. Well, that's essential. That long-term lease is necessary for Ethiopia to commit itself towards the development of a port and transportation. If they don't have a long-term lease, they would be foolish to make a long-term investment. And this is ABCs of understanding how you physically grow an economy. Now, the problem is that you have complications which actually come from colonialism. The problem of colonialism, the legacy of colonialism, is still infecting all the thinking that's going on in these countries because of the history of Italian colonialism, British colonialism. This complicates the whole process. I'm not saying we shouldn't recognize there was colonialism, but I'm saying we have to be mature enough and have enough foresight to move forward. We have to move forward to develop this region. Ethiopia now has about 120 million people. It's going to have 150 million fairly soon and beyond. It will not only be one of the largest economies in Africa, but some people think it'll be one of the largest economies in the world. Now, if you want this economy to develop with the third largest population in Africa and the second largest economy in sub-Saharan Africa, then you have to move ahead with economic development. Ethiopia will probably need multiple port access because it's to various parts of its country for agricultural goods, for infrastructure goods. One of the big complaints that the AU has correctly is the majority of trade in Africa is exported out of the continent, and only 15% is among African nations. This will change that. In fact, this could become a model for the rest of Africa on economic development. So I think colonialism, the legacy of colonialism, the hatred and anger that people have, the lack of understanding of economic development, all these factors contribute to people not understanding the potential for a win-win situation. And if we don't, the prime minister is correct. People got very upset when he said we have to have this. It's an existential crisis for us to have a port development project. He was right. This wasn't a threat. This was a sound economic statement. I would make the same statement. So are we going to move ahead with port development, which will expand the Ethiopian economy, which will expand the entire economy of the Horn of Africa and East Africa? Or are we going to be foolishly mired in the past staring down at our feet instead of looking up to the future.
You usually comment that any development happening in the Horn of Africa, be it in Kenya or Ethiopia or Somalia, Somaliland, South Sudan, Sudan, Eritrea, or this Uganda, Rwanda, Tanzania, it would leverage the physical economic growth of the people of Horn of Africa. And you are a political economic analyst. What does it mean by physical economic growth, technically speaking?
I say physical economy because I want to make a very clear distinction between those people who claim they're economists, but all they do is measure values of stock market transactions or monetary transactions and values and speculation. I measure physical wealth. How much food is produced in a country per hectare? How much food is consumed per capita? How much energy is produced? How much energy is consumed per capita? How much rail lines, kilometers of rail lines do you have divided by the area of the country, etc.? How many tons of goods pass through a port on a given day? All these things are measuring physical, tangible products of wealth, which are consumed by human beings. Frankly, I don't think setting up a stock market in Ethiopia is a good idea. I don't think speculation on securities and debt is good. I could do without it myself. I think what we need to do is make inputs and investments, short term and long term, in physical products, because what is the goal of an economy as opposed to a stock market analyst? The goal of an economy is to improve the standard of living, physical standard of living of the population living today and preparing for the growth of the population, that is, the children and grandchildren of the people living today. That requires physical investment in electricity, in agriculture, in mechanization, in railroads, in roads, in schools, and in ports. So to me, this is obvious. Other people can't think this way because they've been indoctrinated by this stupid free trade model and making money, 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 money. We're not interested in making money. We're interested in creating wealth that satisfies the physical, material needs of our people. So Ethiopia is going to go to 150 million people. How do we satisfy those needs and actually increase the quality of life for the future generations above what it is today for our current population? Those are the real questions that we look at what I would call scientific principles of economy. That's what we should be examining. And this process of port development, and as I said, we're going to need more than one port. How do we do that? Does it benefit the whole region? Who benefits from it? What is the spillover effect? This is all obvious, but people don't think this way, and we have to change people's thinking to understand this.
There are very handful commentators who just try to ignite political tensions between Somalia and Ethiopia in these very critical opportunities. But people like you and others, big numbers of commentators consider this instrumental opportunity as a blessing for these two nations. What's your message for those who disseminate hatred among these two people?
Well, we've seen increasingly, don't forget, Ethiopia went through a very destructive war from November 2020 to November 2022. And this slowed down the economic development of Ethiopia. So we're still catching up. And now we've got new tensions arising. The problem that people have is they don't see the purpose of the nation state and the nation state's economic policies for the development of its people. If we look forward and we look ahead to the future and we recognize the significance of the growth of the Ethiopian economy over the next 20 years, then we understand this is a beneficial development. There's complications, yes, because of Somali and Somaliland, and those have to be discussed and worked out. But there are warmongers, and these warmongers inside African nations, including Ethiopia, and warmongers outside, external actors, as well as internal actors. These people are not thinking about the interest of the Africans. They're manipulating either for their own perverted ideology or for geopolitical control of the area. They're not helping. Anyone who talks about potential war is at worst, at best, a fool, and at worst, a provocateur trying to create a war. There is no basis for war. Well, let's negotiate everything through reason, and reason based on economic development. So there may be some tricky discussions we're going to have, but we can proceed forward because we know in the end, the economic development will benefit a couple of 100 million people in this region. And that's what we need to focus on: improvement in the standard of living of people. Get them out of poverty, feed them, give them good housing, good education, good jobs. This is the obligation of governments. We've got to give up the anger, rage, and backward thinking from colonialism.
Since Ethiopia showed interest of having a sea outlet last time, many people, many political commentators and media houses, igniting hybrid war, attaching the case to state of Eritrea. But notwithstandingly, Ethiopian government made MoU agreement with that of Somaliland. Why the government of Ethiopia chose Somaliland over Eritrea, though?
Well, don't forget you have Ethiopia is the largest landlocked nation, has been so for a couple of decades. So you have parts of it where Eritrea is on the Red Sea, Somaliland is on the Gulf of Eden, which leads into the Red Sea. So you have this whole trade route, which is the Indian Ocean, the Gulf of Eden, the Red Sea, up through to the Suez Canal. This is one of the most traveled transportation routes in the world by ships. Therefore, it is important that Ethiopia have direct access and the most modern advanced ports in the area. Now, don't forget, many years ago, Ethiopia had negotiated a partial ownership of the Berbera port in Somaliland, I think 19%, and DP World from UAE had a large percentage, about 30 or 31, and the rest was owned by Somaliland. It didn't go through, but there is many countries in the world that have access to other countries' ports, sometimes for military uses like Djibouti, and some for economic development. This is not an unheard of practice. But the fact of the matter is, a deal, despite the agreement between Eritrea and Ethiopia initiated by Dr. Abiy Ahmed in 2018, there was a positive agreement between the two countries after many years of hostility and tension. That was reversed, or at least stalled, after the war. And that was unable to be reversed because the initial discussions were ports along in Eritrea. So now there's discussion of a port in Somaliland. As I say, this is just the beginning. There'll have to be more ports available to Ethiopia. And Ethiopia will build more corridors of high-speed rail to take their manufacturing and agricultural goods to these ports. And these ports have to be modernized so they can handle the thousands of tons of goods that will pass through them. So now we're focused on a discussion with Somaliland. I wouldn't eliminate the potential of another port coming from Eritrea along the Red Sea. And this is something that we should work on. But the discussion with Eritrea did not move forward. So now Ethiopia has moved forward with an MOU with Somaliland, which has not fully been worked out. MOU is a understanding, memo of understanding. It's not a concrete agreement. So we have a month to find out how the concrete agreement is worked out. And as I say, this should not be the final word, nor this should be the final port. And I would hope other nations think the way I think, because it would be beneficial to all.
Professor, before departing, if you have any thing to forward, the floor is yours.
I think one of the biggest problems I see in discussing these ideas with people is they don't live in the future. They're stuck in the mud of the past. And what I suggest is not only the African leaders, but the African themselves have to get out of this. We see the same diseased thinking with ethnic nationalism. What are we going to do today that gives us a different world 20 years from now? What kind of world do we want 20 years from now? What kind of policy to our economy do we want? What kind of standard of living do we want? Okay, once we have a vision in our mind of the future, then we bring that vision of the future back to the present, and that determines our policies. I live in the future, in potentials of the future, and people, unfortunately, the majority are stuck in the mud of the present and the past. I would like to see that change, and I think if people would change their thinking more to accommodate mine, then I think we would see more progress. And this is what I write about and speak about, and it's on my website, Lawrence Freeman, AfricaInTheWorld.com.
Well, Professor Lawrence Freeman, thank you for your invaluable insight and analysis on ongoing geopolitical situation of Horn of Africa. Once again, I would like to say thank you very much on behalf of OBN Horn of Africa.
My pleasure to always be talking with you.
Thank you. Dear viewers, thank you for watching. This brings you the end of our edition for today. See you next time with another edition. Bye-bye.